Do you get the most value out of cards that have been graded by BGS, PSA, or SGC? In today's video, we're going to look at the same cards as they've been graded by all three companies and figure out which one at which grade point sells for the most, and then which one is the best value when it comes to grading companies delivering bang for your buck. But first, here's the intro. So I had a friend ask me this week, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he basically said, hey, if I submitted my cards to get graded between the three major sports card grading companies, and they all came back a 9, which 9 is the most valuable? So I wanted to make this video and just see how graded cards compare from company to company. So we're going to pick 3 cards that have really high populations, and just look what they sell for in graded form between those companies. Alright, the first card we're going to look at is the Luca Prism rookie card, just the base. There were so many of these graded, figured it would be a good place to start. So let's look at the PSA 9 level. It sold for $70 on the 15th of October. I tried to grab the most recent sales. Most of them were auctions if I had to grab it buy it now, but it sold buy it now outright, then I used that. Anyways, the PSA 9's worth $70. The PSA 10 though is worth $225 on recent sales, so it's worth like over 3 times as much as the PSA 9 if you get lucky enough to get the PSA 10. And when I'm talking about PSA and I say luck, sometimes I actually mean it. It sometimes feels like luck to me. The SGC 9 is a recent sell at $100. I think the footnote is none of these had sold super recent, so I think by the time the last SGC 9 sold, Luca's cards were up a little bit higher. He was coming off a finals run a little bit fresher, so just note that. And then the SGC 10 sold for $127.50 fairly recently. These were very close to the same time. This 10 selling at $130 versus this 10 selling at almost $230. So just the fact that the PSA 10 is worth twice as much as the SGC 10 gives a lot of points to PSA here in this argument. The 9s are where the story gets interesting though. There's a lot of different 9s out there, a lot of different sample sizes, but it did seem like the median selling price for the BGS was about $90. So this one sold for $91.26, and then the very next day is when this one sold, this $70 one. So at that 9 level, at least in the Luca Prism rookies, BGS was selling for more than PSA. The 9.5s, this one sold buy it now outright at $175. PSA obviously doesn't do 9.5s. They don't have subscores at the 9 level. This 175 is a 9.5. Feels like a pretty fair mix between the 70 here and the 225 at a PSA 10. But if you were lucky enough to get a BGS 10, you're looking at a $450 card. The thing to know, obviously, is that BGS just doesn't hand out 10s. That's something very, very rare. When you submit to BGS, you got to almost think that the ceiling is a 9.5. And that's why it's unattractive to submit to BGS. They grade like super tough. And you just bearing in mind that like you're not gonna get a 10 most likely. It seems like an act of God. I've got 1 10 from grading from them, and I don't send them a ton of cards, but I've sent them enough cards that it feels miraculous to get a 10. To further emphasize that, here is GemRate's population report for this Luca Prism rookie card. There are 46,000 total cards, and here's how they break down. So at PSA, you can tell, here's the 10s, and PSA's done 20,000 10s and 16,000 9s, so there's actually more 10s than 9s. At BGS though, there's only 129 10s out there, and then these are the 9.5s, so it looks like the majority of them are 9.5s. These cards, these 2018 Prisms, are honestly pretty nice cards. They're usually centered well. They didn't seem to have the quality control that Panini deals with now. But anyways, 3,000 9.5s and only 100 10s, so you're looking at just a percentage of the mint cards are actually a 10. And SGC just hasn't graded too many of these cards in general, but there aren't any 10s, so the fact that I found one's actually kind of impressive, I guess. And if these numbers tell any other story, the big takeaway to me is this: if you're submitting and you're just trying to maximize your odds of getting a good grade, PSA is the way to go. Look at this. I mean, there's 20,000 10s, and they sell for a solid $225. So the floor is the highest when you submit to PSA. The pricing also is the highest, and we'll look at that too. Alright, next card we are hopping to football, and we're going to do the Joe Burrow Prism rookie card 2020. There's a ton of these cards made, a lot of them graded. Let's give that one a look. So the PSA 9, the first one sold for $20.50. As a 9, if we go to a 10 though, we 4x. It goes to $84.95 for a PSA 10. This is a cheaper card than the Luca one, obviously. $20 PSA 9 seems like a pretty safe buy, but the fact that it 4x's at the PSA 10 level is really impressive if you jump from a 9 to a 10. So SGC now. The SGC 9 sold for $15.50. Again, that's only 3/4 of the value of the PSA 9, but it's such a cheap card that that's a very, very small amount of money at that level. The SGC 9 5 sold for $34, and the SGC 10 sold for $80. So the SGC 10, once again, was not worth quite as much as the PSA 10, but is very, very comparable if you land a 10. Once again, though, it was the 9s that really caught my eye. This one, the BGS 9, sold for $32 of Burrow. Again, compared to the PSA, that's 50% more. They sell pretty strong at the 9 level compared to SGC and PSA, so BGS 9s are pretty strong. And then the BGS 9.5, which again is something that you need to kind of frame in your mind as like the ceiling when you submit to BGS, sold for $42, so nowhere near the $80 mark that the 10s at SGC and PSA are selling for. And speaking of thinking of 9.5 as the ceiling, I legitimately cannot find a BGS 10 in recent sales in the last 180 days on eBay. So this card, BGS is grading real tough. This year had a lot of centering issues, so it doesn't surprise me too much, but there's just no 10s out there. And now I've done modern basketball and modern football, so we're going with a little bit of Hall of Fame action just to see. We're doing the Jerry Rice rookie card. The thing is, at the PSA 9, PSA 10 level, those cards are super duper rare. So what we're going to do is 6, 7, and 8 between all three companies, starting with PSA. The 6 sold for $56. The 7 sold for $62.50, pretty close. And then the PSA 8 makes a big leap up to $165. So the difference between 7 and 8 at that 1986 tops level is a pretty big deal. But how does that compare to the other company? Well, at BGS, the 6 sold for $51, so we're pretty close. The 7 sold for $70, and the 8 sold for $129. So once again, we see a pretty big jump. It doesn't go quite as high as it does with the PSA 8 going up to $165, but going to $130 is still quite a leap. Then finally, SGC, you got $55. They're really consistent from grader to grader at the 6 level. They're all worth about $55. And they're really consistent at the 7. This one sold for $61. So you're looking at about $55 and about $60 for a 6 or a 7, no matter what company graded it. And then at the 8, the 8's more in line with the BGS 8 pricing at about $130, while again, the PSA 8 sold for $165. So big takeaways, just thinking back to all the cards we just looked at. PSA makes the most sense if you're just trying to guarantee the highest floor, because they hand out 9s and 10s at a lot higher rate. They're a little bit more friendly when it comes to grading, and their grades are just worth the most. But what company has the best bang for your buck? Since we've just looked at what I'd consider pretty low-end cards in this video, we're going to check the pricing for the low-end stuff. And fortunately, your friends at Cardlines have an article that's got you covered. This article is something that I wrote a while ago and recently updated. It compares PSA, BGS, and SGC pricing. So if we go down here somewhere, here's a look at all the different pricing. Again, the high-end cards are getting super duper expensive at PSA. If you want something that's valued at more than $10,000, it's like $1,500 to grade now, so it's super duper expensive. But I'm going to say I'm just somebody off the streets without a collector club membership or anything, and I just want to grade any of the cards that we just looked at. What is the price? At PSA, you are paying $25 a card. BGS has kind of revamped their policy, so it doesn't matter what the declared value of the card is. It's just based on turnaround time. So if you're good with 45 plus business days, which is honestly about what you're going to expect at PSA 2, then you're looking at $18 a card. So it's $7 cheaper per card. And then finally at SGC, for cards less than $1,500, which is going to be the majority of any collector's collection, you're looking at $15 if you're willing to do the 20 to 25 days. And remember, the SGC 10s are selling for pretty close to what the PSA 10s were selling for when we're comparing card to card. Again, the 10s were selling for very, very close to the same. You're also getting your card back significantly faster. It's 20 to 25 days here instead of 45 days, so that's nice too. PSA is the standard when it comes to grading, so I'm never going to say don't grade there. Their prices are not too crazy out of line either. They're only charging more than everybody else because they can, and because they know the value that their grade, their authentication carries. For the sake of the question I was asking in this video, which one's the best bang for your buck? SGC is probably the answer, but which one's best? It's always going to be PSA. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any other grading questions you want answered, let me know below. I will see you next time.